Let's get more on this now with Khaled Elgindy in Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, where he also directs the program on Palestine and Israeli-Palestinian affairs. Welcome to the program, Khaled. The opening of Israel's embassy in the UAE is a culmination of this ongoing process to normalise relations between the two countries. How significant is this moment?
Well, it's significant in that it consolidates the process that began, as your report indicated, 9 months ago. The most important event, of course, was the decision to normalize in the first place. So it's quite expected that at some point, after normalizing relations officially, that the two sides would open embassies in each other's countries. I think this particular moment had been planned for earlier, but had been postponed because of the violence in Gaza.
It's interesting that the so-called Abraham Accords that established ties between Israel and the UAE were signed by the former leaders of both countries, Trump and Netanyahu. Is there the same drive from the current US President Joe Biden to push other Arab states to sign normalization deals with Israel as well?
Well, the Biden administration has certainly welcomed today's development and has welcomed the normalization agreements between Arab states and Israel in general. I don't think we're going to see the same kind of aggressive push for normalization that we saw under the Trump administration, which included, setting aside the UAE and the Bahraini cases. But in cases like Morocco and Sudan, there was quite a bit of arm twisting, of cajoling, a lot of pressure, and in some ways a very high cost. Like with Morocco, for example, Morocco was rewarded by American recognition of its occupation of Western Sahara, of Moroccan sovereignty there. So it was highly transactional, and I don't think the Biden administration is going to go to the same lengths to push for normalization, but they certainly do welcome them.
Palestinians across the political spectrum have slammed the UAE's decision to normalise relations with Israel. We know countries in the region have historically refused to recognise Israel because of the occupation of Palestinian land. What does the recognition of Israel by UAE and other Arab nations, as you mentioned there, mean for the Palestinian cause?
Well, I think contrary to what a lot of people believe in Washington, I mean, there's a great deal of wishful thinking that is associated with these normalization agreements. Many people would like to think that they will somehow facilitate a two-state solution or a credible peace process of some kind. I don't really see that to be the case. I think the fact that so many Arab states are willing to normalize under present conditions is more a sign that Arab states are walking away from a two-state solution and the possibility of having a credible peace process, because the message that they're sending is, look, we have interests, we have bilateral interests with Israel, we have regional interests in common with Israel, and we're going to pursue those interests, and we're not going to wait for this unicorn called a two-state solution for that to happen. So, they're essentially, I think, turning their backs on Palestinian statehood.
Okay, Khaled Elgindy from the Middle East Institute. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for joining us on TRT World.